Beach FM, locals talking to locals.
Beach FM, wonderful to welcome back. He's been on the YouTube, I believe. Ralph McAlister, good morning and welcome to you.
I think you don't believe in my technological sort of expertise. I think you think, what has actually been on YouTube?
I must say, I was a little bit surprised when you mentioned YouTube and the musicals, and I thought, wow, well done, Ralph.
Well, I'll tell you, because of lockdown and so on, there are so many wonderful things happening on different TV outlets now. You know, we've had Amadeus with the National Theatre of Great Britain, which was one of my favourite plays, and the stunning sort of rendition, which has been, I think it might just have finished. But anyway, I'm not going to talk about that, except that I stumbled across a North Carolina University production of Oklahoma. Background, Oklahoma was first really great musical of the 20th century, I think. And it was performed during the war in 1943. The first production was in 1943. And of course, it's been a huge favourite with Surrey on the Fringe on top and If I Loved You and all that, or ever since. But I think If I Loved You is on the next one, Carousel. So here we go. But the unique thing about this, and I think this would appeal to many of your listeners, is it's available on YouTube now. It's a student production, but the wonderful thing about it is it's a replication as accurate as they can offer today of the 1943 production.
Really?
Now it's the choreography, it's the costumes, it's the design, it's everything that happened from the research from the 300 or 400 students involved to bring a history, living history of the first performance. And as such, it's absolutely fascinating if you've got any interest in the birth of the musical. And of course, being done by students, the actual musical was actually written for young people. And so it's all, and some of the talent is just wonderful. It's a real tonic, John, and I just thought I'd quite like to broadcast it to your listeners, because it is available on YouTube. It's totally free. The only thing that might put people off, and that's that you've got control of the button on your control system. The first act is about 2 hours long, which is what it was originally. And then the second act, which you can stop and start, of course, is only about an hour long. But I just felt I'd gone back in time in the most wonderful way, you know, not Back to the Future, but, you know, that sort of feeling. And the whole thing is beautifully directed and conducted by an orchestra, the exact same orchestra, or a scored orchestra from 43. So that's my major recommendation for this morning. But then, of course, that put me on to just watching another of my favourites from way back, Carousel, which was the second production of Rodgers and Hammerstein, or Hammerstein, depending on which school you went to. And that is a modern production. It was filmed, I think, 4 years ago at the Lincoln Center. And again, that's totally free on YouTube for the next couple of weeks. And so you could go on there and watch Act 1 tonight and have a sleep and watch Act 2 tomorrow. It is a shimmering production because it's not a full production. It's a, what do you call it, where the orchestra, it's a concert production.
Yes.
So you've got the orchestra, the New York Philharmonic, right on stage, and all the acting takes place in and around the orchestra. And they have 4 of the wonderful cast, including Nathan Gunn. I'm a great fan of this. He was in New Zealand with Mandy Patinkin about 5 years ago, and he's an opera singer. And so the whole cast is extremely talented operatically, but not to that pompous style that I think sometimes opera singers give to things. You know, I think of some of the work I've heard sometimes of Carey, whose work is wonderful, but she doesn't do light musicals as well as I think other people.
Can be a little bit fruity, I think, could be one way of
well, I thought I'll let you say that. You're right. You know, I mean, it's very difficult when you're an opera singer and the stars of her, you know, and I appreciate that. But I usually don't listen to her if she's singing I Could Have Danced All Night. I turn off and say I will dance myself without that thinking.
So this is a production in the Lincoln Center of New York. This is one of the premier venues in the world, isn't it?
Exactly, and it's obviously started with the initiative of the New York Philharmonic, probably, because they are central to it, and it's just, the music is just soaring, and you get wonderful sort of plots, and of course you get, as you do in Oklahoma, you get a couple of numbers that were not either in the films, both very good films of their time, Gordon and McRae, and then you've got Carousel with what's his name anyway. There are a couple of numbers in each of the shows which you don't hear, you've never heard probably some of them. So it's really an education of the highest order and desperately pleasant and exciting. And I'm sorry I'm not talking about books as well.
Well, I'm not. And actually, Carousel, it's quite a story, isn't it? It's based on a classical story, I believe.
It is, yes, right. Lilium, I think, was the story, and they weren't going to allow them to film it. But of course, it's all about physical violence that men towards women and so on. And so, I mean, for its time. But then, of course, if you look at what's his name, the guy who tries to seduce and take. Poor Judd is dead, you know, poor Judd is dead. I mean, and then it's a killing, and he goes back to life, back to reality after he's dead. I mean, it was so far ahead of its time, and the exciting stretching of our areas. And so you go straight to somebody like Sondheim, who learned at the feet, almost literally, of Hammerstein. And he was, now he's the greatest one, of course, I think, that's living still in his 90. He got so much of his initiative and admiration through Hammerstein when he was a young kid, you know. So anyway, that's my take on the world.
Wonderful.
The sun is shining.
And it is wonderful to have YouTube as well. As you say, it's absolutely free. And what a treat. Well, I'm absolutely delighted, Ralph. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. You have made my day.
I make it back to books tomorrow, I promise. Next week, I promise.
106.3 Beach FM.